Hello, sunshine, and welcome back to the Gold Biz podcast with me, your host, Rachel Traxler. This is truly an honor to have Paige with the Legal Paige on the podcast today to talk about a topic that honestly I haven't heard talked about anywhere before, and that is, can other vendors legally use your images for their marketing? What does that look like legally? What legalities need to be set in place? What are your rights? How can you legally share the images with vendors? We cover all of that today. But before we dive in, if you are a regular listener of the Gold Biz podcast, please leave a review. I would love nothing more than to just hear your beautiful voice on what you think about the Gold Biz podcast. And then I'd also love to share the love in return. Okay, you know I'm a no fluff girly when it comes to education. So grab your notes app and let's dive in. All right, Paige, I'm so excited to have you back on again, second time on the Gold Biz podcast. Welcome back.
Thanks. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I know. I'm really excited. And I think today's topic is going to be a fun one because it's something that happens to a lot of photographers, but it's something we also create that situation for ourselves. So it's something we don't really think about sometimes. So how can we legally talk about it? Basically, how can other vendors legally use photos for their own marketing? And do we need to have specific clauses or contracts set in place for that? So we're going to dive into that a little bit. Can you explain the legal rights that a photographer has with their own images and what that means for other vendors using those photos?
Yes. Okay. This is coming up all the time, especially in our Facebook community. If you guys aren't in it, it's the Legal Paige community on Facebook. You can just type it into the search bar and join. I have seen, honestly, in the past, I would say 6 months, so many questions about this. I think other vendors are ill-informed. They don't know what they don't know. And as photographers and as an industry, we all kind of need to stand up for ourselves and realize that we do own the copyrights to these images. We have not given these copyrights away to people. And the issue started with venue contracts, and I'm not sure what lawyer wrote this up. I doubt it was a lawyer because they know the difference here with intellectual property. I bet it was some venues that got together and they were like, we need to add this to our contracts, or just someone random decided to add it. And I think it started at the venue stage because venues, for whatever reason, feel like if there are photos taken at their venue that they just suddenly own all these images, and they can go ask the couple for these images, and the couple probably doesn't know that they can't share them. And there's this clause that they have in the contracts, these venue contracts, that are saying we get access to all these professional photos. And so the clients are like, okay. And again, they don't know what they don't know. And they just will send the link over. And then all of a sudden you as the photographer see these images on a billboard or in a magazine, or the venue using them all over the website, and you never gave them to them. So it probably came from the couple situation, the couple sending it. And then you're in a sticky situation because then you're like, oh my gosh, do I reach out to my couple? And now I have to make this awkward. And maybe they were so great to work with and you've gotten tons of referrals from them. Okay, so just painting the picture here on what can occur. And I don't know why venues had this in their contract, because they can't just go acquire images without getting them legally from the photographer. So let's take a step back. Now that the venues kind of started this, I'm not sure why, and then other vendors have kind of picked up on it. You're seeing it a lot in wedding planning contracts. You're seeing it a lot in DJ contracts, catering contracts. So we're really talking here in a situation that you're working with multiple vendors, mainly weddings and events. This also may occur at styled shoots as well. In a styled shoot, though, you're kind of all in cahoots together to use the images for commercial marketing and advertising. But I will tell you a story that actually just happened in our Facebook group that I found fascinating about proper contracts in place.
Ooh, all right.
So you own the copyright. We all need to be hand in hand together as photographers. We own the copyright to these images. We have only given the clients who have hired us a personal license to use. That's the only contract we have signed with anyone. So vendors cannot just go use your images without permission from you. I think there are 2 schools of thought and 2 ways to go about this. And I'd be interested to hear what you do or have done in the past. To build my photography business when I was first starting out, to build know, like, and trust with multiple vendors in my area, I gave images to other vendors. And I think there's a large cohort of us as photographers that do this. And I think it's really important when you're first starting out as well to kind of build goodwill in your community. However, they didn't just go get those from the clients. I did in my workflow, I made sure that I sent sneak peeks not only to my clients at a wedding or event, but I also sent them to the vendors. I had the list, the emails, and in my delivery email, I explained what they can use this for, which was social media and you can display on your website. If you need to use these images for anything else, like they make a big promotional like marketing campaign or something along those lines, or they're using it for like a Facebook ad, I just asked that they got more permission from me, or we worked out some other kind of licensing deal, which would mean compensations at play. So here legally, that's what this is a verbal licensing agreement. From you as the photographer, you're allowing them to not own the copyright of your images. You're licensing the images. You still own the copyright. But again, you're doing it verbally. So it can get sticky. And you're just giving it to them and saying, like, you can use this for XYZ purposes. At least you've documented it. You've done your due diligence to like tell them what you're agreeing to. Maybe you put in a little bit of information about you still own the copyright to these images. Like if you have any additional questions, just reach out to me. That could be great to put in that email. If it's like a larger thing that they're asking you for and they want to like use these images for, that's when a licensing agreement comes into play. And it's a non-exclusive licensing agreement because you don't want it to probably be exclusive just to that particular vendor. You want to be able to still disseminate these images, this copyrighted images that you own to other vendors as well. So that is an actual legal document that everyone would sign. And that's usually when they're using it for like more intense commercial purposes than just like posting on social media. And a lot of times that comes with a quid pro quo of compensation in some respect. A lot of times it's not a lot of money, but it's still like making money off of your copyrighted images. And then the very last thing that I will say here, and then you can ask a bunch of follow-up questions, is model releases. So I want you to make sure though that you have acquired proper model releases from both clients that are in the photos, and that you're probably being very careful about the sneak peeks or the images that you're sending to additional vendors that don't include issues regarding model release with other people in the photos. So it's best to only send them images that you have gotten that model release in your like client contract for. Like family photos, that kind of thing. Like just don't share those ones. Larger, like venues may use like reception images or things along those lines, or dancing images. Those are fine because they're kind of more in like a public space. Like everyone always asks, you have to get a model release from every single person in that photo. No, not necessarily. There's probably implied consent here. They've seen you on the dance floor. They've seen you taking photos. Like they understand that these are probably going to go to the couple, but they may not agree to you using those commercially and giving them to all kinds of other third parties. So you just have to be careful of that. Like if you send that image, just know there could be a potential legal issue down the line with not having proper model releases, and you may have to like retract that image or work with that company to like take down that image or get proper model releases. So it's best to only send the best of the best highlight images with your clients in them that you have releases for. Hopefully that's a really good start to get us going here.
Oh, girl, let's go. Let's unpack this. That was so much. I have like 20 follow-up questions. This is great. I love the idea, like you were saying, outlining it just to go way, way back to outline things in your workflow and to talk about it. And I do something similar, but I love the way that you're specifically outlining, exactly what they can use the photos for and really like reiterating that and talking it. And I love the workflow too of being specific with those vendors. And so do you suggest them signing, I think you said either an agreement or a document or like a full contract, or what do you suggest with other vendors like the venue, like wedding florists, wedding planners? What type of agreement should we have between the photographer? Because I know in my personal experience, like you said, it's really good for vendor connections and vendor relationships. And that's something that I've always kind of done is just been like, I'm excited about them. Here they are. Feel free to use them in your social media marketing and stuff. That's just something that I have done. Like you said, as you're growing your business and you want to have good vendor connections. But then I've also, on the flip side, have seen like florists or planners get published. And all of the publication are all of my photos, and I'm not mentioned anywhere. And so it's stuff like that where it's like, wait a minute, like you had this huge publication, you got this huge feature, and I'm not mentioned at all, but the only visual aspect that you have to your promotion is from me. And so I've kind of been on both sides. So back to my question, did you say a legal agreement or a document or contract? What do you suggest for that?
Yeah, it's really based on your level of comfortability here.
Yeah.
I never wanted to go the route of like, here is my licensing agreement.
Right.
Please sign it and I'll send over the images. However, if you've been in sticky situations like you have been, like maybe you want to do your like extra little bit of due diligence here and have them sign something. It's not a bad idea. And it's like a little simple one pager. It's called a non-exclusive licensing agreement. We'll make sure that we link it for you guys.
Perfect.
And it just explains like what they can and cannot do with those images. I think also there's an issue with communication here when this occurs. I like to always take a step back and be like, what could I have done better?
Yes.
I need to take some responsibility here as the photographer because they did acquire these images somehow. So if they got them from me, then maybe I wasn't clear enough with what they can and cannot do with this. And I need to be super clear about crediting me. If you use this, you have to credit me in this capacity. And again, this is awesome that you guys are listening to this because you're learning well in advance. Like, okay, not only would they potentially use these on social media and I want them to tag me, and I think that's usually all we say in these emails. You need to say, if you ever use these for publication purposes, you notify me and give me proper credit before you get these published. Or we agree to like the terms of that publication. So really just stipulate in your communication to these vendors, like what they can and cannot do if you're kind of going to go the route of not sending a licensing agreement. But I think if you've been burned a couple times, it would probably behoove you to send just a simple licensing agreement. They want the images. They're going to sign it. I can guarantee you. If you send something over to them and like, hey, if you wouldn't mind just signing this non-exclusive licensing agreement, I'd be happy to send you the highlights from this event. And they're going to be like, heck yeah, I want your professional images. I'm going to sign. Just make it easy for them. Don't make it difficult. And then the last thing that I would say is communication with your clients. So that's really important before the event occurs. Ask them. I know it's in your contract. I know you're probably fully covered, but double dip here. And tell your clients like, hey, I'm going to send out highlight images to all the vendors the day after your wedding. I know you're going to be on your honeymoon. Like you're going to be busy. Is it okay if I send those to them? They'll probably say yes. But if they don't, then you know your client's comfortability and you know how to proceed forward in a better manner. So again, it starts with your clients, asking them so that they have knowledge that these are going to go everywhere and not just on your social media account. Ask them like, I'm going to post 24 hours after the event or 12 hours after the event. Obviously, I'm not going to do it till after the ceremony. Like I'm just talking about generally speaking, what I used to do as a photographer and I think is commonplace in the industry. Just informing your clients of what's going to occur just so they're not alarmed and they feel like they've given permission to do it. They always feel better. Don't ask for forgiveness later. That oftentimes ends up in a way like just a stickier like client situation that you don't need to be in. Like just ask for permission. It's fine. They're probably going to say yes. They're probably excited. Like they've worked so hard to produce this wedding or event and they want to be everywhere splashed online, but maybe they also don't. And they're just like more comfortable with just you sharing it. Or like maybe they just want you in the venue and the florist and that's it. Or like maybe they say like, well, if you wouldn't mind, like they could share like images just of the florals and the tablescapes. But if you wouldn't mind just like not giving photos of me, like with my bouquet or something to the florist, like those are just really, like precious to me and important to me. And I just don't want those shared online. Like you need to ask, even though you probably have an all-encompassing model release in your contract, like just be a good photographer,
Yes. Okay. 1000%. I love all of this. And so then My question is, I love the idea of like setting kind of this up in your workflow and asking them. And is this something that you have just within your contract, or do you have it separately and you draw, like, do you have it in your contract and draw extra attention to it? Or do you have a separate form that says that specific thing, like you said, that they can share, sneak peeks only type of thing?
Yeah, I would just have it blanketly in your original client contract.
Okay.
You don't want to make this too
Easier.
cumbersome and confusing to your clients.
Mhm.
It's more of just a reiteration in your workflow of what they agreed to in your client contract. You're just doing it in more like colloquial, like layperson terms, talking to them and saying like, hey, I just want to remind you that I'll be sharing on social media and I'm going to be sending them to the vendors. If you have any issues with this, just let me know. But maybe don't even say that. See, like, this is where I take a step back and I'm like, how would I go about this? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not your photography mentor. I wouldn't say that. Like, you never want to open the door to like what you
correct.
can't do. Yeah. So you want to say something like, I'm so excited about that. I just wanted to give you a heads up.
These are who I'll be sharing it with.
Yeah, this is who I'll be sharing it with.
Yeah.
And we can't wait. We can't wait. You know, I can't wait to take all these pictures. Like they're going to be awesome kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then it's opening the door to them like thinking about that and, you know, being okay, but at least you're communicating with them. They don't need to sign anything because they already signed a model release, most likely, that I call it all encompassing, where it says like, you own the copyrights, you can use the images for all, you know, marketing and advertising purposes, and you can distribute those to third parties without additional, you know, like agreement with the clients. They're just agreeing to that in your model release. I'm just going to pause here and say, I have noticed over the past few years that clients are getting more and more concerned with privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Totally understandable, I think, in today's digital age. And so you may encounter clients like looking at your contract and seeing that all-encompassing model release that's very standard, and clients pushing back on it a little bit. And that's totally fine. We have an a la carte clause now that's called like a privacy of photos clause. And it's a good, there's like three options in there, I think, of like how you could modify your model release to be a little bit more in line with what your clients are comfortable with. So you would, you know, maybe it's still a model release clause, but you're just like, you know, parsing down what they are okay with you giving to, you know, putting out on social media or giving to other people. And then, you know, in advance, like if they have said that, you need to be extra cautious about giving it to vendors, because maybe they are only okay with like 10 images that they have chosen after the fact that you can use for your own marketing and advertising. So, you know, like, I need to flag that in my workflow that this is a different wedding and I'm not able to share until maybe a month down the road and they've agreed to this image and that kind of thing. And then you wouldn't share with the vendors, but then you want to communicate with them in that respect.
Yes.
Because you don't want to leave them hanging like, hey, I've been waiting for these images and you're not giving them to me. So that there's so much like business photography mentoring happening here, but also the legal aspect of it is important. You don't want to like point it out just like, you know, blatantly and like shove it down their throat, but you want to remind your clients of these types of things and really get a sense of what they are okay with you sharing and what they're okay with you giving to vendors.
Yeah. I'm interrupting my own episode to give you a quick glimpse into my signature coaching program created for established photographers wanting to double to quadruple their prices, book their highest package, and bring in inquiries consistently. This is my high-level container of go-to photographers who are making huge waves in the industry. And the biggest difference in this program is that we get a full 12 months together for deep dive transformation, weekly coaching call support, 4 coaches in the program to deep dive into specific topics, and a content retreat, all included in one program. And I always say, if you can book one extra wedding from your year in the program together, you're going to see your ROI. And it's just the weekly norm wins for my students. So I'm fully confident that you're going to be able to do that and way, way more. And this is an application, phone call, and acceptance process only type of program. So if you are curious if this is the right next steps for you to just blow up your business this year, you can fill out the application at racheltraxler.com/apply or get the link in the show notes. I'll be in touch shortly after you fill it out so that we can talk through together if this is the right fit for you. I'm very honest with people and I want this to be a great fit for everyone involved. That's just my heart behind the way I do this process. And I also think that's why my students just see so much success in this program. So don't just be an information consumption overload this year. I want you to be an action taker and start implementing change into your business. So again, if this feels yeah, and I love that too because for us, it's like, oh yeah, it's common sense. You signed a model release, whatever. But they don't, it's like they don't really know what that means sometimes. And so I love the idea of taking aspects. And if you're curious on like what to include in your nurture sequence in your email, like workflow emails, or what to send to clients in a workflow and how to nurture them, take your contract and literally just break it down. And that's a really good place to start because a lot of people don't really fully understand what each clause means, what it means for them, what they can do with their photos, and even just beyond this clause alone, like, just the entire contract. So I think that's a really good piece of advice too, to just take it, break it down and send it to them. And I want to ask one question too about the vendors and the sneak peeks, because I want to go back to that. I think you were saying that with the agreement that you send to them, it kind of outlines that they can use just the sneak peeks alone. And then is that what you were saying? And then if they wanted more, then they can sign something to get additional?
Yeah, so a licensing agreement is going to go over all of this.
Okay.
You can have the actual four-cornered licensing agreement that's going to have like ownership of images clause and copyright, attribution, and like how you would go about that, payment terms if there's any payments to get these, or like if there whatever the quid pro quo is on like you sending these images over, how many images they can use, what they can use these images for, where they can use these images. And if it goes beyond that scope, then it requires an additional agreement and probably additional compensation. That's like legal language that you would see in a non-exclusive licensing agreement. So you can have them sign that. The vendor could sign this prior to you giving them the images. And then it's up to you, right, Rachel? Like as a photographer, like, do you want to just give them 10 or 15? Like, do you just want to give the florist just the images of the floor? Is it easier for you workflow wise to choose like the 50 best images and you're giving it to all the vendors? And then the vendors can go through that little highlight section of your gallery and, choose which ones pertain to their business. I don't know. I don't know how you're going to go about that. Like everyone does it different.
Yeah.
But I'm also saying here, legally speaking, I think a lot of photographers are just doing this in email format. Like when you're sending the gallery or that highlight section of your gallery to the vendors, it's like you basically need to draft up in like your own brand tone word, like verbiage, a licensing agreement. And so you need to make sure that you have those things, like that you still own the copyright, like how they can use the images if they go beyond that scope that they need to contact you, how you require attribution on social media, on their website, on additional, commercial endeavors that they may have with these images. So it feels weird. It feels weird as a photographer to do like all this stuff. But Rachel and I are saying like this happens all the time and it's going to end up in a bad situation and you're going to feel weird about it if you don't take the proper steps at the beginning, because like the clients could get upset, other vendors could get upset. You're probably missing out on compensation. You're probably missing out on proper credit in like a huge publication that you probably could have gotten more clientele from. Like, do yourself a solid and get this figured out right now.
Yeah. And just from personal and just being completely honest, I've experienced everything that you just mentioned. And so it's something that needs to be talked about and addressed in a legal matter. So I love this conversation because like you were saying, I feel like it's just even I've seen an uptick in it even. Something that probably should have been done, but something where people are either more private or it's just good vendor experience to send it that we think, but there needs to be some structure around it. So I love that. Do you think in your like legal opinion or just your business opinion in general that we should be charging for a specific, not amount, but a specific usage? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I can't give the answer to that one because I think it really depends. There is a school of thought in the photography industry that you should always get paid for your work, that you've worked really hard to master your craft and create that imagery, and vendors should appreciate that,
Mhm.
just like they probably wouldn't give away their copyrighted works, like their mood boards and their documentation and their workflow and their processes. And for whatever reason, I think vendors just don't realize like that is our most valuable asset is
Yeah.
our photographs
Yeah.
and our images. And so it's just educating vendors on that as well. And then I think there's also the school of thought that's really, really good for marketing and advertising. And at a certain point, like, why not just allow other vendors to use it? And
Yeah.
again, I'm in that school of thought, but I just think you need to set parameters and have proper communication with everybody involved in those images, and then ownership of those images and usage rights of those images. Whether that's in an email or a licensing agreement, obviously is best legal practice.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I will say here that, well, we haven't really touched on this, and I was thinking this when you were talking, what happens if they'd use it and now you're like backpedaling?
That was my next question. So that's perfect.
You can just paint the scenario for us here on what we're getting into. Like, what if you're like, oh crap, like how they've now infringed on your copyright, right? Now we're in a legal dispute.
Yeah. And so the same thing that happened to me where I came across the publication of another vendor that they got published using all of my images. I was not mentioned, not brought up at all. Like you said, could have brought in a lot of business. And so then how do you address that? Do you just let it go?
Yeah, I think addressing them is absolutely paramount and something you need to do. And here's why. I think people are, if you're like a little bit adverse to conflict, I understand, but then you're kind of like waiving the ability for you to like own actually your copyrighted images, that you're now like kind of allowing it to occur. And the more you allow it to occur, the more other vendors are going to pick up on that. And also, I just think it sets a really poor industry standard if we're not contacting other vendors. Like I said, it's our most precious, valuable asset as photographers. And you own it. You own the copyright to that in the intellectual property, and you need to inform them of that. Sometimes, like I said, it's just education based. So reach out to them, explain like what wasn't okay. It's probably the attribution here. If it's a print publication, which isn't as frequent now, but it still occurs, that is a little bit more difficult to like retract and put your, like name all over it, because it's probably already printed and done and they're not going to do a reprint. It's not like the newspaper comes out the next day that they could do a reprint or like fix it.
Right.
That was great when that occurred back in the day. That was lovely. But maybe there's another way to go about it, right? Like you explain to them in kind words, like what they did, that it's not okay, that it's copyright infringement. You need to use that language. Like they need to know it's not okay. Mm-hmm. And they need to know like what they did that is not appropriate in terms of they missed crediting or attributing any of this to you, and these are your works, and yes, they were allowed to use them, but they forgot to credit you. And then maybe come up with a solution. So what could they do that would make this better right now? Probably like maybe they need to blast it on social media that they missed crediting you and they credit you that way. Whatever that is. Sometimes people are like, I just want them to pay and like that's enough for me. But is it? Like, I think what's really bugging you is that they didn't credit you.
Yeah.
It's probably not the money here. If we're talking like People Magazine and like, like maybe you had
a little different,
a very high-end wedding. Yeah, you need to get a lawyer involved. We probably got some money issues going down.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about just general, like average type of clientele and weddings. So yeah, that is what I would suggest you do. I wouldn't let it go. It's also going to eat at you if you let it go. But I think you can approach this in a very sensible, professional way, but bring in some legal verbiage and terms where they know, like they're not allowed to do that. And also you're saving other photographers from having the same thing happen to them with that same vendor. Like, yeah, maybe you took the brunt of it this first time, but like, why not educate them and tell them so they don't do it to like 10 other photographers? Mm-hmm. Like, we're all a community here. We all need to help each other out.
Yes, totally. Oh my goodness. There's so many good tips in here and things to add in your workflow, add these forms and these legal documents like you were saying. So, can you tell us where we can find all of that?
Yes. So I am at thelegalpage.com, thelegalpaige.com. You can also find me on Instagram at the legal page. I don't hide, I don't hide here. So the same name everywhere. You can also go to our Facebook community. We have situations like this pop up all the time. So the legal page community on Facebook and other entrepreneurs are probably experiencing the same things or have experienced things, and they all chime in. It's a really like collegial group. I keep it good. Like there's no bad things going down in the comments, and myself and my legal team are in there answering questions too. So it's a great Q&A place and like social listening place. And then the last thing I will tell people is if you have additional questions surrounding your contracts or like how to get legally legit, we have a free legal class that you can go to at getlegallylegit.com, and I will walk you through even more surrounding kind of your client contracts and what I would suggest and like how they set boundaries and how to explain things to your clients in your contract. I know we touched on that here, but I can give you a deep dive in that class as well. So I would just suggest you go check that out.
Beautiful. Oh, well, thank you so much, Paige. You are just always just a wealth of knowledge. I'm so honored to have you here, and thank you for all of your insights. And yeah, it was a really fun episode.
Of course. I hope everyone learned something.
All right, there you have it. I really hope you loved this episode just as much as I did. I could talk to Paige all day on all legal aspects of running a photography business. There's so many golden nuggets. And if you want to get a percentage off of the resources that we talked about in today's episode, like that legal document or model release clause or the copyright clause or just the entire contract in general, I'll put the link to my discount in the show notes so that you can get it. But make sure if you loved this episode to screenshot it and share it to your stories and tag me at Rachel Traxler so that I can see which episodes you're loving the most, and then also share the love in return too. But thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you so much. And as always, keep shining, and we'll see you next time.